All right, let's talk about this, shall we? Have you heard about this? Some schools are now telling kids you can't walk or ride your bike to school because it's just not safe. And some parents are very unhappy about that. And this debate got a huge amount of attention, and it caught our eye when one family decided to revolt. 7th grader Adam Marino rides his bike to school in Saratoga Springs, New York every day. His mom, by the way, rides along with him, okay? And the school administrators and the police are having a standoff with them over this. That is Route 9 in Saratoga Springs. I know that road well, and that's where they ride to school. But now the Marinos may get their way because the district is reviewing its policy. A fair and balanced debate right now. Let's bring in Nancy Pullen. She is the Associate Director of the National Center for Safe Routes to School, and Laura Wellington, creator of the education cartoon series The Wumblers. Welcome, ladies. Good to have you here today.
Thank you.
You know, in my town, it's they call this Walktober. And you're supposed to encourage your kids to walk to school. And I left a big note this morning, walk to school, because I think that it's good for them. And they should, you know, get off their little behinds and get some exercise and walk to school. And Nancy, you pretty much agree with that, right?
Well, you're certainly not alone in feeling that way. We are seeing countries as well as communities around the USA that really have taken hold of this interest in being able to safely have their children walk and bike to school. And you're right. This is International Walk to School Month, and next Wednesday is Walk to School Day.
It is. Laura Wellington, I know you disagree with this, and you had a personal experience that makes this very potent for you.
Right. My daughter Jacqueline, who is 14 years old, was riding her bike in town, and she ended up getting hit by a car not half a mile down the road from where we lived. Now, luckily, my husband was around to receive the phone call and take her home. She did need some medical attention, and even at the age of 14, she was severely shaken. So I think that there are safety issues. I do think that you know, there are situations where if the child is less than a mile from home, and there are parameters set forth where there will be crossing guards or what have you.
But Laura, you know, I mean, do you really want to live in a place where these people rode their bikes to school and they had a standoff, basically? There was a state trooper standing there and school officials saying, ma'am, you cannot ride your bike to school. I don't want anybody telling me how my kids can get to school. I mean, shouldn't this be left up to each parent? If you decide, Laura Wellington, that you don't want your daughter to ride her bike, that's fine. That's your decision as a parent. But why should anybody be able to tell you whether you can or not?
I think that, you know, the situation is the child going to school. You know, the child going to school and getting there safely is a concern for the school. And the school will have responsibility if something happens to that child along the way. The school will be called. The school has to be called it has to call you if the child does not arrive. So you're engaging the school in this responsibility, and yet you're saying, you know what, you don't have a voice in whether or not I make
Laura,
that decision.
I would imagine if the school said, you know what, every child must walk to school, you probably would have a problem with that, right? You'd say, don't tell me how my child should get to school.
I think that it's a safety issue.
Let me bring Nancy in. Nancy, is this an issue that a state trooper should be standing in front of a little kid's bike, as happened in this situation in Saratoga, and saying, you know, I'm sorry, ma'am, but your child can't ride his bike to school?
Well, I can't speak to that particular situation, but what I can tell you is that communities around the country are really interested in being sure that it is safe for kids to walk and bike to school. In fact, there is a federal program called Safe Routes to School that provides funding to states and communities who need to address safety concerns in order to make it to improve conditions for kids to be able to walk and bike to school.
I mean, I think everybody wants their kids to be safe on their way to school. I guess the issue, Laura, is, you know, every day that you wake up, you know, something could happen. You know, and when you get to the point where you have all of this legislation covering all these things that really, you know, maybe should be left to families to decide what they think is safe for their child, why would it be okay for someone to intervene in that what should be, in my mind, a family decision about how your kids are going to get there?
Again, it's the direction the child is actually going, and that's to school. And they do have a responsibility to make sure that child arrives safely and calls home if the child does not. You're engaging the school in this activity, and yet you're not allowing them to have some say in how the child gets to school. You know, I think also, you know, it also depends upon the age of that child. You know, some parents, you know, their judgment is the child could walk to school, you know, at a third grade, and yet I would say no, the child cannot walk to school when they're in third grade.
You know what? I think some 7 or 8-year-olds are perfectly capable of walking to school, and some 12-year-olds need to make sure that somebody gets there. So it's an interesting debate. We'll see what happens to little Adam Marino in Saratoga Springs, and we'll see if he's allowed to ride his bike to school. Interesting debate and interesting times we're living in. Ladies, thank you very much, Nancy and Laura. Good to have you here today. Thanks for coming.